Okay, recording is live.
Awesome. Good morning. It is Wednesday, May 27th, and this is the Governance Working Group. I'm Juliet, and nice to see you all. And let's get started with our stand-up today. So what's happened for everyone over the last week? As the usual questions, what are you working on? Are there any blockers? And what's going to happen for you over the next week? Who'd like to get started?
I can
All right,
go.
I can start for that one. Or actually, Jenny, if
Oh,
you want to go ahead.
no, go ahead, Jason.
All right, so for me, I wanted to start with a quote today because I had done this in the past and it's been a while since I've done that. And I found one that I thought was really relevant to today. So the quote for today is, "Do not waste your time dwelling on thoughts of things that may never happen. Instead, make things happen that you may have never thought of." So I like that one and I wanted to share it with the group. And other than that, my main focus right now, I've got some catching up to do. I have notes from the past two calls that I want to put together. We've talked a little bit about reorganizing resources and kind of thinking through our new structure as we move forward with the website and the real foundation and all the fun things. So I'm going to keep going down that avenue. I do not have any blockers though. I mean, aside from me blocking myself. So I'm going to work on that and get it up. And other than that, I am good to go. So we can go to the next person.
Thanks for that, Jason. Yeah, so two things. It's funny that Jason said no blockers other than himself, because that's what I was thinking about myself with the blog post. I have something drafted, but it's just not very pretty, so I'm not going to share it just yet. I made the mistake of looking at blogs written by other communities. I was reading the intro to the governance working group blog by Cosmos, and it's super comprehensive and it's really long, and it made me start to think that we need to include some information that we don't have. And I think that was totally a mistake because we obviously have our own way of doing things. So as soon as I get a draft together that I do feel comfortable sharing, I can share that on GitHub and with the group. So I'm going to set a deadline for myself of Friday or Monday. I may or may not need the weekend, but you should see something before the next meeting. The other thing that I worked on last week and on Friday was I went through some of the materials that Harold has been sharing. I know he's been really excited about the possibility of us working with Fab Academy. And so we had a long call on Friday just discussing some of the possibilities. And the next step for us is to just come up with a one pager to share with the group that breaks down some of the terminology and some of the core concepts, just summarizing what we're thinking of doing with Fab Academy. And once the group feels comfortable with everything we're thinking about there, Harold says that we would probably be ready for a meeting with Tomas Diaz, which I think would be really interesting for this group to take the lead on. So no blockers there other than just getting that one pager out to make sure that everyone is up to speed. But if there are any questions that come up, feel free to ask us. But yeah, that does it for me. And I worked on a few other things as well, but we can save those for the discussion toward the end.
I can go next. Thank you both for those updates. I have to mention that there's something deeply philosophical around being your own blocker, but that's a separate rabbit hole. So a small thing first, which is I've been thinking as I was reviewing some of the work that Jason and some other folks did in GitHub, just thinking a little bit about the I tend to use this term a lot, but the user experience, right? The experience of someone like landing on some sort of governance landing page, and that would most likely be something like stacks.gov. And so obviously, curious to hear Brittany's thoughts on this as well. But what do we want that experience or that journey to look like, right? What sort of material do we want them to see, and what sort of call to action do we want there to be there? Just been thinking a little bit about this as we've been doing some restructuring of the documents in GitHub. No particular blockers there, just curious what other people think. And then the bigger thing I've been doing is I began the process of reviewing the survey results, which has been really, really interesting. I think we have a bullet point on today's agenda for that, so I'll save the details there. prepared a preliminary report on that, some of my own thoughts and some next steps. So yeah, again, just curious, I guess, to hear other people's thoughts and input on that. And I guess I'll keep working on it. Thanks.
Great. Yeah, I was poking around on the GitHub yesterday. So just, kind of, there's so many great resources in there. And I think, figuring out like how to best make it really easy to update those resources, because I know there's a lot of work that's gone into making everything very organized, but how do we, kind of maintain that organization even as more people start contributing and kind of land in and want to help out. So I think that's like a really good thought process there. I've been thinking a lot about, there's all of these various work streams that I think are related to governance and to the foundation. So just thinking about how to communicate like what the roadmap potentially is, and sort of saying like, these are the things that are most important immediately. These are the things, that are coming, but they're not ready yet. So if you want to like jump in on them, you can. So just trying to figure out like, what is the right medium in which to like express that, because it is, it is a plan, not like a definitive guide to like exactly what will happen. So I want people to be able to see it transparently, but also not like worry if something else comes up and it's not in that plan, that it's excluded. It just needs to be considered separately. So working on that.
Hi, Philippe. Do you want to speak today? Do you have a stand up? All right. Well, I guess we will move on from the stand-ups, and then we'll go to the next one on the agenda that I'm seeing, which is the community survey, and that's issue number 1. And Elaine, are you going to be talking about that, or is someone else going to present the survey with the results and the report and reaching out to respondents?
Yeah, I'm more than happy to. I just want to be cognizant also of the fact that Jason had proposed alternative agenda format here, which I think structures the call a little bit differently. So totally fine if we go in this order. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page about which agenda we're looking at.
That's really a good point. Was the link on the other, on Discord, Jason?
It's the same link. If you just scroll all the way down, you'll see it. It was posted as a as a inline comment. Jason very kindly didn't want to overwrite the agenda before we had talked about it.
Yeah, sorry. My goal was to create less confusion. I didn't mean to make that messy, but thank you for that.
That's great. Yeah, so I think that the foundation up first, if I'm reading that right. So yeah, last week we announced the launch of the organization, as well as 2 board members. They sort of, we did an introductory post at Hello Stacks Foundation. I wrote up just a few more thoughts in the forum around, how we came to this decision around these different board of directors. So what, sort of the key pieces were around, we needed to have 3 minimum board members in order to set up the organization. I will be a board member, and then 2 board members have experience being on boards before. They serve as fiduciaries in their primary role. They're existing members of the Stacks community. They own Stacks tokens. So we wanted to make sure to try and really check the box on how do we make sure that there's confidence that there will be financially responsible individuals helping set up the board. So that minimum board was announced. And then kind of as another piece of that was this idea of calling for other board nominations. we wanted to get something active and alive, so the organization, but recognize that in order to do so, we actually had to move sort of quickly and kind of be very diligent about how we announced who those like initial board members were, and making sure that get them signed on first. And then this idea of calling for board nominations, I think is really exciting, but also it's kind of a green field of how the execution will specifically look. So, finding a way to have community input and get collected, but then in terms of how the those nominated individuals actually get, selected or approved by the community is something that I think that is like a big project. And, I think that there's a lot of ways that we could go about that, especially looking at other research. So the goal of it, though, was to ensure that people know that like we want good people. And if you're learning about this for the first time and you would like to contribute, there is like a place to go and do that. And then over the next probably, I'm assuming like 1 to 3 months, like really trying to actively come up with a process, and then also getting board members added. So whether that's 1 board member, whether that's 3, there is flexibility in that, but I think it's just like making sure that it's representative of the different things that aren't currently on the board that we want to be on the board. So that's what's top of mind for me. So I think with this group, thinking about board nominations, is this something we discuss in GitHub? Is this for, like writing it up on the forum? Is it just conversational in Discord? Kind of like how to get input on this process, so that we can kind of move it along and move it forward and feel like there's a lot of people who've collaborated versus just saying, hey, here's how we're going to do it, and we're going to go ahead and do it.
I'm curious, with the forum posts that you have up already and with the block survey, have you gotten any responses? Just like a total count. You don't have to share any other info, but are you getting a little bit of response there?
Yeah, I haven't checked. Let me just double check again this morning, but I had like 3 responses so far, but I will, I'll check it out right now.
Well, good morning. Sorry about being late.
Just
received the call. I think that the announcement that of the launch of the foundation was very important, because that brings materiality of a concrete action that we need that board, those board members. So as you said, probably the idea of generative movement of of people, knowing what we need and all that, that will be wonderful opportunity to participation, especially if we announce that, and then so that bring the people, to get to know the foundation, and that we need all that. That will be a good excuse in order to present the foundation and make it more massive, you see. And so it's been, I think that it's a wonderful opportunity to let know what we are doing.
Okay. Yeah, just confirming, we do have 3 nominations from folks.
Yeah,
you are
doing.
Go ahead, Philippe.
The board members that is already nominated, and 2 men, no?
Yes. Yeah. All the nominees are men so far too. So I think we can do better than that.
Have you thought about the process yet? About, I know that that's up for discussion with whether we're going to discuss in GitHub or the forum or Discord, but have you thought about like would it be more traditional where the nominated person provides some sort of bio and there's an interview or anything like that, or we come up with our own nomination or going through the process for the person.
We need an ordeal. We need to tell the person to go steal fire. Or something.
A quest. I love that. Yeah. I think, you know, the default thinking is like, okay, you know, is this person, you know, a legitimate person? Are they a good fit? Do they meet some of like the values criteria, which I would imagine is through an interview, whether that interview is like recorded and shared with the community, or if it's, you know, there's someone from the community also on that as part of that, like that could be a way to bring it in. But I think, yeah, definitely doing sort of the diligence that you would want to make sure that this person is capable, has the time to do it, and then also meets all of the values. I think in terms of what happens if there's multiple people that seem like a great fit and we have limited capacity, is, you know, I'm looking at what other folks have done, and I think, you know, some of the thinking is like, well, why don't we vote the people in who should be in? The challenge with that is that if you don't have enough people voting, then it becomes about getting enough votes to even make it credible. So the flip side of that is, I think, like Zcash's nominations, what they do is they do like an approval process. So, you know, people can approve or disapprove of people, and that kind of gives signal if there's like some concerns, and those can then be addressed. But it's not like you have to vote to get in. It's more like flagging if there's issues once you kind of come to a select few who you think would be the right fit. So I think like that end process of, you know, if we have too many people, what do we do then? But I think the initial process is just validating that these are quality people that we would want. And, you know, personally, like I will be working with them, so I want to make sure that, you know, they're people that are really going to represent and show up and do the work that we want them to in the community and in the board.
There's so many interesting pieces to this conversation about, you know, where those people might be and how to find them and the whole process like you're describing. I just wanted to, and I think it is definitely a longer conversation, but I wanted to add one thought, which is, Brittany, you had mentioned maybe on the forum, the possibility of there being, and we talked about this before as well, of course, like the possibility of there being like a community representative, so to speak, on the board. I think that's a wonderful idea. And I think, I'd of course, love to see that happen. And I think that that is maybe something that that we as a group here could discuss in slightly more concrete terms, like how we might put forth such a nomination, so to speak.
Yeah. So like the idea of a community chair. So like, you know, for example, the Tezos Foundation has like a community chair on their board. And that means that the attendee to the board meeting may be different each time, but they are representing the community. So it's their responsibility to kind of solicit feedback from the community, sort of provide the research around like the sentiment, the different issues that are concerns to the community, and then represent that, like those various interests at the board meeting. So what they've found is that because they have a lot of, you know, subgroups that kind of are focused on different things, whether it's like about their economics or consensus or just, you know, community developer outreach, they get to cycle and kind of represent in different ways. So I think that that's really interesting because it doesn't limit it to a single person having to represent everyone. It's saying that like, you know, the person who attends is going to have to do all this, a lot of legwork actually, in order to be a good representative, but everything will be heard at the board level. So I think that that's like really interesting. I don't know what you guys think about that, but I thought that was pretty cool.
I believe that, sorry.
Please, Philip.
No, just essentially what I've seen, you know, as a good way of governance is at least, you know, the board members have to be members of the community. As I mean, it doesn't matter, you know, what they do, but they have to be members of the community in general. I mean, and because if they're not committed to the purpose of the institution or what we want to achieve, it will be a breakdown there in the future, or near future, whatever happens, you know. we had to maintain unity in what we are doing. So in that sense, it has to be a member of the community on participation and all that. Then candidates is complicated. You can nominate, but candidates is always difficult because, you know, ego comes in, and sometimes ego is not something that is very healthy for institutions.
I agree 110% on Philip's last point. That's a big thing, and that's something that we should bear in mind as we consider the right person or people for this role. I just wanted to add 2 quick thoughts to what Brittany said. So based on, not surprisingly, the things I've seen and experienced in Ethereum, and being a person who was kind of a little bit in this role for a while, I sort of a liaison between the community and the Ethereum Foundation. The first thought is that it's very hard. It's a lot of work to follow all those channels, right? To kind of keep a pulse on what's going on in the community. It involves, in practice, things like attending a lot of events and being active on Twitter and being active on Reddit, and putting up with a lot of trolls and just making oneself available. So yeah, it's a lot of work. So people should be aware of that. And the second is, there is one person in this de facto role in Ethereum, Hudson Jameson, if you follow Ethereum at all. And that's not great either. He's a wonderful person. He works very hard, but as a result of there being a single person in that role, you know, he, to put it bluntly, like comes under attack a lot. A lot of people in the community feel that for whatever reason, their interests are not being represented, and it's not Hudson's fault, or, you know, their trolls will be trolls, that kind of thing. And so I guess what I'm suggesting is, actually, if it is, like Brittany, you spoke a moment ago about Tezos, if it's more of a rotating thing, I could see that relieving some of that burden upon a single person. So I just wanted to share that as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Like, I think, unfortunately, there's no simple like solution. Like, there is going to be a lot of work, especially representing the whole community. You know, it's why the board represents the, you know, organizing of the foundation, and you know, making like financial related decisions to how like money gets allocated within the organization. So like salaries and things like that. But it will not be in control of like the technical committee. And I think the way that grants get issued also, you know, the board can have input maybe on the process, but they won't control who's getting money where. So it's just trying to spread out more of these different functions to a lot of people who can then like specialize and really understand the complexities of those things. And I think that's why it's like important to have a board that has very broad knowledge that can weigh in. But for experts and specifics, we want to be able to have spots that people can contribute, and those roles won't be like capped. Like, it won't be like only 5 technical people, no more ever will be on this committee. It's like, it can be a little more fluid, I think. So that's where the current like mindset is at.
I think that's great. Yeah, I mean, you'll see in the SIP process proposal that has been refined a bit now, and got some feedback from Jude and some other folks, that we have the idea of, I think we sort of settled on working groups as terminology for it. But yeah, but different groups of experts, and let's call it, what is it called in the UK? Devolvement of like aspects of governance to like local groups, I think is a great idea.
Yeah, and of course, Jude is moving over to the foundation, which is great. So he's going to be helping, you know, like run the technical committee. So he's very excited, and does a lot of work in our forum. So if you haven't interacted with him yet, he's pretty active.
Yeah, it was really cool actually to watch that developer call the other day. I think that was yesterday. And I just wanted to chime in and say I'm on the same page with that. You know, I really like the idea of separation of powers, and I like the idea of like having the different segments so that we get even representation across the board. So there's definitely a lot of potential there. And to the point you made earlier, I think there's definitely some room for the same way we had a community research observer to look at something like that throughout the interview process, just to keep the community involved with someone for that too. So everything's sounding good over here.
Great. Yeah, I think that's it for the update for the foundation. So I see on our next, like on the agenda, it's moving into action items. kicking off with a community survey. So I can hand that over.
That works for me. If it works for Juliet and everyone else, are we good to move on to the next topic?
I think that not hearing anything else from other participants, we've had a great discussion on the board nominations and different ways of approaching the community. I loved everything that was discussed, and really excited about what Brittany raised about the Tezos Foundation. I'm really excited about seeing what we can do here. And I wonder, just before we move on, are there any action items, Brittany, that we'd like to put on our list for next week to discuss?
Yeah, so I think this, idea of like nominations is something that I would love to have as kind of an action item this week, is maybe to talk through different ideas or different research. And if you are interested in kind of being more involved in like that aspect, maybe we can set up like separate time to go deeper on that. So.
Yep, I think that sounds fantastic, and I would love to help out if you're talking to me personally.
I would love to have you help out, yeah.
So that sounds good for the action items, and so I think we can then now move on to the next point. And Lane, were you going to handle that with the community survey?
Yeah, let me start by dropping a couple of links here into the Zoom call, so folks can kind of follow along. Bear with me for just a sec while I find them. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to share is directly out of Typeform. It is a report. I guess it speaks for itself. So there's the link for that. That link should work for everyone. Let me know if it doesn't. And the second thing I'm going to share is something I wrote. So these are kind of some of my thoughts. This is sort of a preliminary report that I wrote about the survey. And there's a spreadsheet, but I'm not sure that it needs to be shared in this forum right now. It contains exactly the same thing as the first link, but just raw data format. So let's see. So just as a recap, I missed last week's call, obviously, but we kind of had consensus 2 weeks ago that we should move forward with doing some analysis of the survey results and closing the survey to new responses. That's something we should make a final call on this call, by the way. And if we do have consensus on closing off the survey to new responses, I'll do that today. Yeah, so we had 58 responses when I began this analysis about a week ago. And funnily enough, after 3 weeks of no responses, we got a couple more in the past week. So I wonder where that came from. So we're at about 60. Maybe what I can do is just take about 5 minutes to very quickly walk through some of the, let's call them high-level insights. So if you click on the second link, if you haven't already, that Google Docs link, if you want to, you don't have to, I can just speak to these things, but just quickly walk through a few interesting points. So we had 23 countries responding, which I think is pretty amazing and really speaks to how international this community is. But it was a very long tail of responses. We had a lot from the United States and a lot from Chile, which again, I think speaks to Philip's hard work.
How important is Chile? Never knew that.
There you go. Brittany, I think
it's a commitment of the people, probably, it's,
yeah.
Well, yeah.
I was just going to say, Brittany,
I'm surprised. Well, my team answered, but my team is not so huge. So it's 5 people, 6 people, but
cool. Yeah, I think we had something like 14 responses, something like that from Chile. So it was 13 responses. It was quite a big number. I was just saying, Brittany, I think we can barely make out Chile on the map behind you there on your left, so we can, we can celebrate. Cool. Yeah, and then a very long tail. A lot of countries. I said there were how many? 23 total. So a lot of 1s and 2s, which was kind of cool. vast majority of respondees, around 90%, are not in paid roles. They're people who are kind of hobbyists or still learning, which I think is an interesting insight. Many of you will have noticed 92% of the people who responded who are part of a project said that their projects are self-funded. Not necessarily exclusively self-funded, but at least partially self-funded, 92%. It's a very high number. I thought that was very interesting. And to me, that kind of suggests that there's a lot of potential here for doing things with app mining and grants, potentially. Most people who responded indicated that they want to get involved in governance. And like one thing that jumped out at me was they want to get involved in things like reviewing SIPs, which is interesting because that's a difficult thing to do. It's a highly technical thing. 70% of respondents suggested they have a lack of understanding either about Blockstack or about its governance or both. So I think that that also suggests that we have our work cut out for us, but it's a high potential group of people who might be excited in getting more involved in governance. About half prefer plutocracy, which is to say sort of token voting over all other forms of governance. I found that very interesting. That's a rabbit hole we could explore. So the average level of understanding about, there's a whole bucket of things here around PBC, which we can come back to, and I'm definitely curious to hear Jenny and Brittany's impression of some of these things. But like one example of this is that the understanding of the mission of PBC was relatively low. It was about a 3 out of 6, which kind of surprised me. So that's kind of a moderate degree of understanding. And there were other aspects here about transparency and the role that folks think that PBC should have relative to the foundation. And then the last thing I'll highlight right now is that 58% supported a form of tax or an ecosystem fund to fund the foundation and its work, which is what Zcash is doing. And so that's really interesting. That really surprised me because that's the kind of thing like no one in Ethereum supports, just as one point of comparison. So I'll stop with the insights there. There's a lot more in the documents that I shared. I guess what I would say is that, I don't know, help me out. Let me know what you all think next steps are here. There's more I intend to add if in that document, the middle section, things to consider. I tried to go back and cross-reference the initial set of questions I had posted on the forum when we kicked off the survey. And so I want to try to respond to some of these questions, and I could use everyone's help, with that as well. And yeah, the results, I think the report I just shared here can be shared publicly as far as I'm concerned. It doesn't contain any sensitive information. I think we should share the raw results in the spreadsheet format as well. I've already removed the sensitive information like email address from that and leave it open to other folks to do their own analysis. That's kind of where I'm at. I guess the biggest question is, do people think we should close the survey to new responses? Or let me rephrase the question. Does anyone think we should not close the survey to new responses?
I think that if we do just another effort, as we launch the foundation, is that there's still some time to fill up the survey. So then maybe you can get 2 or 5 more, and so that also will I don't know, then because of numbers, it will be better. Because you suggested 100, but of course it will be difficult to get that. But at least we have another effort in order to, because of the foundation. This is a good excuse to call for attention.
I had 2 thoughts regarding the survey. One, I think the uptick that you saw recently is that the survey was again featured in This Week in Blockstack. So I think that was where probably those few extra responses came from. But given that we are trickling down to just getting a few at a time, I almost feel like it's better to close this, learn what we can from it, and then maybe approach it a new way if we wanted to learn new information, mainly because of that completion time. To see people going about 30% completion rate, 43 minutes average time to do it, that's some pretty high numbers. So I'd like to see some improvement there, but otherwise I'm open to it. And then looking at the responses too, we talked about having towards the bottom in thoughts and analysis, you said, we have a whole ton, 300,000 Stacks token holders, but we did not reach a whole ton of them too. So I think that's an interesting question that we can look at and maybe find a better approach for.
Agree.
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, I guess I'm agreeing with you. I think that like additional surveys, fact-finding is always a good idea, but I think we can be a lot more targeted in the future. I think we can isolate the specific things we want to learn about. Like this is a great starting point. I think we have a lot of fantastic raw material here, but I think we could do more frequent, shorter kind of 5-minute type surveys. Maybe we could think about that. And the marketing gears in my head are turning. I'm not really very good at marketing, but maybe folks who have more experience with it, customer analytics type stuff, we could do some of that. And yeah, the reaching out to the Stacks token holders is something that we had originally discussed when we were launching this, doing things like random sampling or something. I think there's a lot of potential there going forward.
From what I see in as the results is, we can do a lot of things with this. So it's a wonderful material. Congratulations. Yeah, if we can do channels, we can, there's so many things to do. So congratulations, this is a wonderful way to start.
Thank you for sharing that, Philip. I agree. I think everyone here, as well as other people, worked really hard to make this happen, and I'm really pleased with the results. I think that there's a lot of insights here, a lot that can be learned and garnered from these results, and I think it's a great sort of very concrete initiative that this group can point to as this is the thing we did, and it has a concrete impact, and there's a concrete report or something that we're publishing here. I think we should definitely write one or multiple blog posts about this. I'll defer to Jenny on the timing there, but I think that could be quite interesting as well. There are definitely some interesting, unexpected insights here. Also, I think the next Blockstack Summit, whenever we're ready to have another one in person, should be in Chile. I just want to throw that out there.
So following up on that, I agree with, excuse me, I agree with Jason's proposal regarding, taking a look, closing this down, taking a look at the results we got, and then also following up on Lane's proposal about the writing the blog posts, and perhaps Jenny, do you have any anything you can add to that right now before we wrap this particular item up?
Nothing immediately comes to mind. I think that just sharing the insights themselves is pretty important. But I do think that in order to get good feedback, we should include some thoughtful insights first, but I'll have a think about the best way to format it. I think just showing the number of responses is impressive in and of itself. So I can follow up with an issue on GitHub.
Thanks, Jenny. So unless anyone else has a burning question or something they need to add, I'm going to move on to the next action item, and that is the governance landing page, if I'm on the right agenda.
Sorry, just closing the loop here. So I am going to go ahead and close the survey to new responses. Philip, your point is noted, and I think we can definitely discuss how to do additional surveys going forward. But this is just an important action item that I think we need to reach a consensus on. Is everyone okay with that?
Yes, for me.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Yes, for me as well.
And right, so landing pages is next. Do you want to speak to that, Jason, or anyone else? I'm happy to try to, but go ahead if you want to.
Sure. So one thing we've done is we've compiled a ton of resources. When all of this started, we were all asking some very broad level questions of what is governance, what do we want to model ourselves after, and we have a ton of links sitting in the resources repo. And while we've sort of restructured that to make it a little easier to consume, there's definitely a lot more that could be done. So this idea is issue number 45 in the project management repository. And we talked about just having some kind of landing page or way for people to have an easier way to digest a lot of these resources. And there's also an issue, I believe it's number 33 in here as well, where I've been collecting resources from Discord and other outlets to add in addition to what we have. And I felt the same kind of thing. We need a better level of organization. So I think that now that we have the foundation, now that we have stacks.org, there's definitely some potential to use that as a tool to direct people to information faster. My recommendation is always thinking of the verbs. If somebody wants to do A, B, or C, they have a quick way to say, oh, boom, I land on the right page. I see a list of resources. I can read what I want. Another idea I had that I proposed in what I think issue 33 was to sort of summarize some of the articles or find a way to highlight the key content that we liked from each one. So it's more than just a link to a gigantic document, and gives people kind of a high level view that they could dig further into. But obviously that takes a lot more time and work as well. So that's something that we'll have to look at as a group and everything like that. But I think the other big thing that I saw that really is a call to action on this landing page was in the survey results. If we look at, it was there in the Typeform link, if we look at how people are interacting with and learning information, GitHub was down kind of like number 6 or 7 on that list. And rather than trying to force people into GitHub, I just want to make it a better relationship between the two. And I think there's definitely some room to do that with a landing page as the main engine. So that's the high level kind of summary of the issue that I could give for everyone here. And I'm curious what others think for sure.
Yes, I think that to share the information is quite challenging, and the website is always something that the people feel like is more official, but then how you interact, how the network grows, and also different opinions, comes up in a different way, but it's not official, but it's part of the community. So it's something that we have to think about how to integrate all that stuff. We are not the only ones that have that problem. So.
Yeah, Jason, I agree with your points about having a friendly place where people can land, that they can easily find those resources. I think the GitHub is actually pretty fantastic, but I think there could be another landing page, as you're calling it, where they can, find those things easily. I particularly love the idea of having summaries of some of the key articles, so people don't have to, they get the, the high level, the gist of it. So those are some of my thoughts. Does anyone else have some thoughts about this, and perhaps some action items that we can put forth for the next meeting?
I agree with everything that's been shared. I just wanted to very, very briefly jump in and share my motivation for this. I think that governance is hard because it's very intimidating to a lot of people. Even just the word governance, they hear it and they cringe, and they kind of, what they're visualizing is not fun or exciting. And I think to some extent you saw that in the survey results as well, where folks said that they, felt that they didn't have enough understanding of governance or Blockstack governance. So I guess my motivation is think of it in product terms. How do we make into something that is approachable to people and legible to people and makes sense, and it feels like something they want to get involved in? And you know, a landing page is a powerful tool if it's well organized and people can, you know, immediately feel that they have access to the resources they need and the call to action is clear. That's my motivation.
So when you bring that up, that makes me think of having customer interviews and really understanding what the user's needs are, and do we have an understanding? Has the survey given us an understanding of what the user's needs are with respect to a landing page, and what problems are they finding from GitHub? Because we saw one point that you mentioned was that Jason mentioned was that was not the first place they thought of going. So maybe there's room for a mini survey on this, or maybe there's some room for talking with community on this. What are anyone else's thoughts about finding out from a user-centered approach, you know, how we should structure a landing page? Or am I making it way too complicated?
Something that I had meant to share as part of the survey results, I think this is a good time to share it, and I've discussed this with some of you, right, is that we have something, most people who filled out the survey gave us an email address. So we have something like 30, 40, 50 email addresses of people who were motivated enough to fill out the survey, are clearly interested in governance, but obviously most of them have not been active so far because we've only had about 10 people active. So that's a great group of potential users. We have their contact info. We should do something with it. Maybe we should try speaking to them. I'll leave that as an open question, like what we should do with that. But that's one potential answer to your question, Juliet.
Yeah, I would agree with Lane on that. And I also wanted to share that we've had some success with these user interviews with the DevX team. And it's not like they're large groups or anything, but it's super insightful to have 15 minutes with someone in the community to talk over whether the Explorer is accessible, whether it looks good, you know, what changes we could make. And I think as a governance group, especially for Blockstack, a good habit that we can get into is just testing things that we want to try. Obviously, we're always going to face the obstacle or challenge of not having participation or enough participation, and we're always going to want more folks to join. But I do think that the more that we do that and the more that we engage, especially with that list of survey respondents that Lane has mentioned, the more participation we will get over time. And so if we have ideas for a landing page, or if we have even an outline that we want to run by someone, it wouldn't hurt to have like a 5-minute interview and to get into that habit, and to be really public about that too, and say, you know, we had interviews with 5 people last week who said that they wanted to do this, and you know, if there are no objections, we're going to experiment with doing that. Does anyone else have objections at this point? And I know I talked to a lot of you about this, but folks don't really have strong opinions until it seems like something is going to be decided, and then they start chiming in. So I think that's a great way to get started and get people motivated to give their input.
Definitely. Yes. And on that line of thinking, I think one of the best things we can do is just leave room for that input, right? Because if we offer people the chance to at least voice those opinions, and they weren't voiced throughout the process or not until the end, it gives us a better picture. And the other thing I wanted to share, I mentioned that Typeform result. So the what are your primary resources for learning about the Blockstack platform and community really came back down to Discord, the Blockstack blog, the Blockstack forum, and technical articles. So I think there's definitely some room there to make sure we're using our outlets as efficiently as possible. So, you know, being able to have a central landing page on stacks.org would be excellent in my opinion. And I think we just didn't have that ability before, right? Like the StacksGov organization on GitHub was designed to be a little bit of that independent house for information from Blockstack, and now we have the foundation that can do the same. So I think it's just pieces that are coming together now.
I agree on that, and that essentially the reality of the information has been very spread out, and so to make an effort to summarize and put things together and all that, it will be difficult. the reality is that we have to look for ways of like an index of information or pointers, because right now, for example, my personal challenge is I have 5, 6 different consoles in order to have different subjects in each console, and then have a way to concentrate, because there's so much information. So then in each aspect, you know, governance has a console, and then the start, the testnet has another one, and then my project has another one, and my email has another one, and then the Discord has another one, because, you know, Discord has pointers to different things. So in the sense of, that's the reality of what we are facing, but not only we are as a Blockstack the community we have, is every aspect of our life we are having that, but especially because we are in quarantine. So how we organize that, that's something that we can come up with, something that will be a good example. And then with this information, we can try to reorganize, so that to make it easier for everybody to interact and have feedback and all that. And well, of course, I'll separate the official, because the official is something that it always have to be, like Brittany speaks official, but then all the opinions, you know, is our opinions, but we have to be clear that it's opinions, you see. And so how you encourage opinions and then, but don't mix it with the official, the decision of the organization or the board or whatever, it comes up, you know.
Yeah, I definitely echo your point of just, there's a lot of places and they all have different kind of purposes, and, you know, GitHub feels a little more formal than Discord, and, you know, the forum is more conversational. So yeah, I agree with you. I don't know if there's a solution, but I think trying to be mindful of that when we're making sort of decisions on where to put information or where to have these conversations is spot on.
I have a concrete proposal for concrete next steps. Again, circling back to what Juliet had said, and again, I'm a broken record here, but this is something that worked well in Ethereum. There was an ethereum.org website that for a long time was run by the Ethereum Foundation with basically no community input, and that annoyed people a lot because they felt that that should be a community property. And eventually it changed about a year and a half ago. It's now a community page, and there is a GitHub repository that anyone can submit a pull request or an issue to. And so we're, you know, as a group, we've become pretty comfortable, pretty familiar with GitHub. So I'm going to propose, and I guess the ball would be in Brittany's court here, but that there be something like a stacks.gov/governance page that would be linked to a GitHub repository that anyone in the community could, as I said, not merge into, but could submit a pull request or an issue to, and that some small number of people have merge access to, and those changes would basically go live immediately on a sort of official governance landing page. So just as a concrete project.
Great. Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
I think as wonderful as our GitHub repository and PM repositories are, resources repository, PM, et cetera, a web page will always be more accessible to more people than a GitHub repository or readme.markdown file will be. So.
Yeah.
But Jason has done a very good job in compiling and linking all the resources. So that's very valuable, and, you know, that's a lot of work, and yeah, but that can be migrated to any place anyways. So.
Yeah, well, I see a couple people have to jump here, so I know no one wanted to interrupt. I actually have to jump too. Was there any last things we needed to cover in the last minute here?
The last agenda item is the SIP process proposal. Yeah, we have like a minute or two. I don't know if we want to discuss that now or wait till the next call.
I guess the biggest question is, do you have a main ask for us aside from continuing to review the document, or is there any other direct action item we could handle really quick? Otherwise, we could probably delay it till next week.
I'm going to pass the ball to Brittany here because I think it's in the foundation's wheelhouse, like what the next steps are with respect to SIP proposal. Brittany, is that something that's on the table now, or is that one of the Q3 things you had mentioned?
So it is like editing it and making sure that it exists. So the SIP proposal is very important for Stacks 2.0 to actually launch and get accepted by miners. So internally, there's been engineers who've weighed in on the process, including Jude, who's been very vocal. Jude is going to kind of, shepherd a little more of that process. So I think what we'll end up with, I actually was just pinging him this morning about, where will that live? Like, is it a GitHub, draft, like final draft, or, sort of working draft that those new additional comments get included in and we can publish it there? Or is it still, are there things he wants to discuss in the forum first before kind of moving it into like the GitHub land? So my action item is just to take away, and hopefully Jude can give an update on either next week's call or just a written update in the Discord channel around that. Cool. All right, right at, well, on Pacific time, right at 8 a.m., so perfectly on time.
Perfect. Yeah. So that takes care of all of our action items. Just for the idea of being consistent, I'm going to go ahead and list off all the open discussion items. But a big thank you to everyone who was able to make it. I know a few people had to jump, but we appreciate everybody being here. So some of the items that we carried over from last week include the.
Jason, I'm sorry to interrupt. I think this was my mistake. I feel like we missed the blog post action item, and I think Jenny had to run. So maybe that also needs to go on this list here at the end of the call of things to discuss next week. Sorry about the interruption. I just want to make sure we don't miss that.
Sure, definitely. And I know, we spoke to it a little bit in the stand-up. So we did get a little bit of information on the blog post update. I think our biggest takeaway from this meeting this week is that she's working to have a rough draft for us by either Friday or Monday. I think really we just need to get the first one out and we'll feel a lot better. But it's, of course, the first one's the hardest one as well. So as we're going through that, we'll be looking for a way to provide feedback and get in on that one. The issue as far as the agenda is concerned with the blog post, we did try to link in some of the older topics as well. Like we had issue number 11 was a list of questions about the foundation from call number 3. And looking way back then, we've actually answered a lot of these questions, and I think they generated some fun discussion. So that's why that one was on the list. And then number 43, that's listed there as well, was deciding on the first 2 to 3 topics for the series. So that's where we'll see what the first draft entailed. But during last week's call, we reached a general consensus that those 2 to 3 topics were a good place to start. So I think we're pretty well set on that, but it will definitely carry over into the next week. And I'll leave it open for a second in case anybody had any thoughts on that. All right.
Good.
So the open discussion items, I feel like, with our small group today and being that we ran up to our time limit now, I don't think we're going to get really deep into these, but I did want to mention them since they're on the agenda. So I'm just going to rattle off each one. Once I'm done rattling them all off, if we do have any comments or anything people want to include now, we can do so. Otherwise, I think we'll just kind of work towards the end of this week's call. So the open discussion items I have on the list, we talked about the community research observer role from issue number 17. And we're kind of out of that research phase, but we wanted to keep the idea open and keep it in mind as we're going through the SIP process or anything else towards making this an official thing. And I think there's definitely some room to tie that into the thought of the proposed board members or, doing some sort of community involvement for that selection as well. So I could see those things tying together. The code of conduct was one that we talked about a little ways back. And I think that is also in the works. So the code of conduct was in the proposals repository for issue number 11. Then we had another topic on languages and translation, which is mainly just keeping our awareness that as we work with an international community, we want to try and provide content in as many formats as possible so that we can have as much involvement as possible.
We
have
have a sense from the survey now what languages at least a subset of the community speaks, and we know that we need more stuff in Spanish.
yes. Yeah, definitely. And big thank you to Philip too. I mean, I was shocked as well to see Chile really throw some big numbers up there and come through. And we know that that effort comes a lot from what you've done and promoted out there. So excellent job with that as well. And then the last two items, we had the shared resources, issue number 33. And this was talking about, as we form the foundation, we want to share a Zoom account. We want to figure out the best way to share YouTube, and also looking at if we can share Blockstack resources as well. So sort of some open questions there, but definitely feel free to comment as on the issue as we're going through. And then finally, just looking at the founding documents again, which touches a little bit on that code of conduct idea. And that was in proposals issue number 9. So those are some of our open discussion items that will roll over to next week. If we have any final comments on those, please feel free to share. Otherwise, I'll give it a minute or so, and then we'll look at closing out the call for today.
Super quick question to Brittany. We had talked about doing like micro grants early on from the foundation to cover some things like shared resources. Any thoughts on that, on how long that process might take?
Yeah, I think that we can do that. I think like with things like Zoom, and I know there's some paid accounts, those are, I think in the short term, probably fastest is for me to set up foundation accounts for those and then be able to pay for them through the foundations almost as like a business expense. I think the issuing of like micro grants is something that I want to have sort of a process for, and it may actually get more complicated if it's under like $100 or something like that because of reimbursement and tax and 1099s and things like that. So I think the immediate solution is probably foundation setup administration, and then yeah, but if there's things that are kind of larger than that amount or don't make sense for that, then that's where I think we can kind of propose them and then figure out what the best way forward is for them. But yeah, and I think I have this in channels with Jason and Lane, because I know you guys have some ownership rights in like GitHub and YouTube. So if you would be open to adding me with my Stacks Foundation email, so Brittany@stacks.org, that would be great.
Is that a Google linked account? Can I add that directly to YouTube as a, okay, great.
It is, yeah. Thanks.
All right, well, on that note, I think we're going to be ending today's call. So just a quick update, next week's call will be on June 3rd. We're actually going to be in June here, right around the corner, and that's crazy to me, but that's all right. And thank you again for everybody being here. I appreciate everybody and the thoughts. Definitely look to GitHub for issues, resources, places to comment. And if there's any other feedback, you know, we're always listening. We have our channel in Discord as well. So thank you, everybody, especially those who watch the recording after the fact, and have a great week.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a good week. Take care. Bye-bye.